Hello, my name is Omri, and I work at Aserto, which is an authorization platform company. And today we're going to go through how easy it is to set up scalable authorization for your APIs using Aserto and Topaz, which is our open source project. Great. So let's first talk a little bit about Topaz, our authorization engine, and talk about why it's a little bit different. Topaz basically combines the best of Open Policy Agent and Zanzibar. Open Policy Agent, if you've ever done authorization for APIs, you're probably familiar with OPA, which is a CNCF project and has a great policy engine and doesn't really have much of a data story. Zanzibar is almost the opposite. It's the paper that Google wrote about how they do authorization at scale for all of their properties. It describes a relationship-based access control model. And Topaz just quite simply is the best of both worlds. It's combining these two really good ideas around authorization. So let's start with a common scenario, which is a to-do scenario. This is a API gateway called Zuplo, which we like. Zuplo is a cool modern API gateway, and they have a to-do application that is a demo application. It has 6 different methods. They are also a Open API native gateway, so they have a description in OpenAPI of these 6 different endpoints. And we're going to go import that into the Aserto console. The first thing that we're going to do is in the Aserto console, we're going to instantiate the API authorization template, which will basically give us the model as well as some sample data, including services and endpoints. And just to show you how easy it is to import new Open API specifications for your services, we have a quick start here that makes it super easy to do that. We can go import an Open API spec. This happens to be the spec from Zuplo, the same service that we're looking at. We're going to go basically paste this URL here, call this to do API, import the API, and as you can see, it can find 6 endpoints here that it can readily import into Aserto. We've already done this, so we're not going to do it again. But let's go actually see what the model authorization model looks like. So first, we're going to start with basically a set of types and relationships that we have created for API authorization. It starts with users. Obviously, users are the subjects in every authorization request. We define groups that are nested groups. So groups, for example, can have users and can also have the members of other groups. And it has 2 important types, a service, which has a set of relationships. So for example, you can be an owner or a deleter or a creator of a service or a writer or reader of a service. So a reader, for example, can execute only get operations against the service, whereas a writer can execute get, puts, and patches. Creators can execute those 3 as well as posts, and deleters and owners can execute all the different HTTP methods of an API spec. And then endpoints in particular have a can invoke permission that is directly assignable as an invoker relationship. So I can make a user an invoker of an endpoint. And then it has basically relationships to the service that ladder up to that particular service. So that is our model. The model is described using a very simple YAML syntax. I'm not going to go over that in detail here, but let's go look at what we've been able to import. So first of all, we have a set of services here. We have a pet store service, a Rick and Morty API, and a to-do list. The to-do list is exactly that to-do list that we're going to go look at in the Zuplo portal in a second. And then we have a set of endpoints that are related to all of those services. And so let's look at all the users that we've entitled to these APIs. Starting with Rick, this is a Rick and Morty themed sample. So Rick is the evil genius from the Rick and Morty cartoon. He can do everything, and so he is basically a member of the Global Deleters group, and the Global Deleters group can basically has all of the permissions on all the services. It is a nested group that aggregates all of these different groups for the different services here. So this is a way that you can assign essentially a super user permission to a particular user. Now, the second user that we're going to go look at in terms of the existing entitlements is Morty. And Morty is a member of the Pet Store API Creators Group, which automatically got generated. And it basically relates to only the Pet Store API, and it grants permissions to do posts, patches, puts, and gets on the Pet Store API. So Morty can go do all of those things specifically on the Pet Store API, the Pet Store service. And then finally, if we want to look at the to-do service, what we've done is we have added the viewer group as a member of the to-do list API readers. This basically means that all of the get APIs on the to-do service are invocable by members of the viewer group. And Beth and Jerry are members of the viewer group, so they can invoke any get API. The viewer group is part of the editor group, which includes Morty and Summer. And lastly, that also includes the admin group, which has Rick as a member. So basically, all five of our chief protagonists can execute any get operation against the to-do list API. Great. And if you want to, if you think in OPA, so to speak, let's go look at what the OPA policy looks like for this particular authorization policy. It's super simple. It's basically a boilerplate policy that allows the operation and delegates down to making essentially a check call against that relationship-based access control database. Now, you could add some attribute-based or environmental-based access control here, but ultimately, the point here is to show how easy it is, how simple the OPA policy is for the API auth scenario because it's all data driven. Great. So now that we have all this context out of the way, let's go back to the Zuplo portal and see what it means to invoke some of these APIs and how easy that is. So here we have the 6 APIs. And what we've done is we have created an authorization policy that we have put in as one of the request filters for the Zuplo API gateway. If we look at how we've configured it, it's super simple. We basically just pass the tenant ID out of an environment variable, a policy name, and an API key for the sort of authorizer, along with the service that we are invoking. And that's all you need to do for any one of these endpoints to basically have Aserto authorize access to this API. Now let's go see this in action. Let's go try to invoke the get all to-dos, the v1 to-dos path here. First with Rick's authorization header. So we're going to grab a bearer token here that is Rick's bearer token. And obviously, since Rick is super user here, he should be able to execute this operation. As you can see, the body comes back. We have a 200 HTTP code here, and in the logs we can see that the authorization response came back as true. And if we want to go execute that with Morty's credentials, Morty should be able to execute that as well, because Morty is everybody is a viewer on this particular service. And in fact, if we want to look at in Aserto at all of the different users and what they can do, that's quite easy to do. We can go execute a check operation and see, for example, that Rick is able to, let's go select the endpoint here, is able to go invoke any of the endpoints here because he's a super user. So as you can see, Rick is able to invoke the delete operation on the pet store API. And Morty can't because Morty is just a creator on that API. We could also ask questions, for example, like what endpoints can a user invoke? So if we want to ask, for example, what endpoints Beth can invoke, Beth, as you may recall, is a viewer. And so she should only be able to invoke the get operations on the to-do app. And in fact, we see 3 get endpoints here that are all on the to-do app. That's all that Beth can do. But of course, Morty can do a little bit more because he's a creator of the pet store API as well. So if we look at all the different pet store types of endpoints here, we can see that Morty can execute all of those. And of course, Rick can do everything. So we're not going to bother looking at that. We can ask the opposite question as well. We can find the users that can invoke a particular endpoint. So for example, the delete pet by pet ID, that should be only invocable by Rick. And in fact, that is the only user that's can invoke that endpoint. But if, for example, we want to look at all the people that can invoke the get v1 to do endpoint, that should be everybody because everybody is a viewer. And in fact, that's exactly what we find. We find all 5 users being able to invoke that. So you can ask some governance questions just by modeling the relationships between users and endpoints and services in this graph. This is something that is very difficult to do just with OPA. Great. So now let's go back to the Zuplo gateway here and try the delete operation. The delete operation is set up exactly the same way. I'm going to go test it exactly with the same 2 users, Rick and Morty. Let's first start with Rick. And of course, since Rick is super user, he should be able to invoke every endpoint, including this one. And in fact, we see a 200 OK. If we look at the logs, we see that Rick was allowed to invoke this operation. And Morty, since he's not the leader, he's not an owner of the service, he should be denied. And if we paste his credentials in here, his bearer token, we see a 403 forbidden, which is exactly what we expected. Now let's see how easy it is to go entitle Morty to invoke that operation. Let's go back to Morty here. Actually, let's go find the endpoint. The endpoint was a delete of in the to-do app. So we're going to go find this particular endpoint. That's the one that we want to entitle Morty to. We're going to just add Morty as an invoker of this particular endpoint. This is kind of a break the glass type of scenario where Morty can invoke this API in his time of need. And if we go back to our portal here and try to invoke using Morty's key here, using Morty's bearer token, now it all works. And again, if we want to revoke Morty's access, that's very easy to do. We remove that relationship and we go back to our gateway and we should be getting a 403 again. And this, of course, is something that you can do easily through APIs, through the CLI, or through the UI. Aserto makes it very easy to go entitle users to APIs and revoke that access and give you all the governance you need to be able to manage all of the entitlements in one place. So that is the essence of our demo here. If you want to learn more, you can go check out a recent blog post that we just wrote about this particular scenario. And we have a complete solution page for this as well, where you can go grab a white paper on API authorization. And we would love to hear more from you. So if you would like to get in touch with us, just go to our website and find the contact page and set up a meeting with one of our engineers. Thank you so much, and we hope you enjoyed this, and have a great day.